Hey everybody, in this video we're going to talk about traditional tests as a component of assessment. First, let me remind you, there are a lot of forms of assessment that aren't traditional tests or quizzes. For instance, remember, you can always assess students using homework, looking at their projects, having them make speeches, even in your day-to-day question and answer sessions within your classroom. Those are all ways to gather data on your students' learning. That said, the traditional forms of tests that we're all used to are still a big part of how we teach and how we check to see if our students are learning. So we'll take a moment here to talk about the pros and cons of three common forms of tests: our objective tests, essay tests, and oral tests. First off, objective tests. These are your classic multiple choice, true, false, fill in the blank kind of tests. The tests where there's a clear right answer or set of right answers and clear wrong answers. One of the great advantages of an objective test is it's machine scoreable. You can plug these into Moodle or into the Scantron with the old bubble tests, and you can have a machine count up the number right, give students a percentage. Pretty simple. Those kinds of tests are really useful, especially now when we can put them on Moodle and have students do them that way, because now we can create objective knowledge checks where students can check in, take a quiz on their own time anytime they want, and get instant feedback from the computer saying, hey, you got 9 out of 10 questions right, pretty good. Point them to the ones they get wrong and help them advance their learning. Without any teacher input, the teachers can focus on other learning activities. So objective tests can be really useful for those quick kind of knowledge checks, those automatic knowledge checks. Objective tests are also very versatile. You can create a good multiple choice test in just about any subject area. It may not cover everything, but you can cover a fair amount of objectives with an objective test. That said, there are also some inherent flaws in objective tests. When you have a test with 4 response options, or a question with 4 response options and 1 right answer, well, students inevitably have a 25% chance of guessing the right answer. And then a right answer isn't guaranteed to tell you that a student knows their stuff. It might just be saying, hey, that student's lucky. So be aware of that when you do objective tests. You have to think about how much is actual demonstration of learning and what role guesswork or chance plays. Objective tests are also limited in that they are closed-ended. Students are presented a limited number of responses, and we're looking for just 1 right answer or 1 small set of right answers. There's not a lot of room for discussion there or for application of knowledge to unexpected situations. Okay? Closed-ended questions make it harder to measure higher level thinking skills and problem solving. Now, that doesn't mean that's impossible. You can design multiple choice tests, for instance, that can access some higher level thinking skills and problem solving. But it's harder to do. And usually, objective tests are going to be better for those kind of knowledge and comprehension checks for the lower level of Bloom's taxonomy. If you want to go for higher level thinking and problem solving, you might need to try some different kinds of assessments, like essay tests, which we'll talk about here. Now, I'll admit, as an English teacher, I love essay tests. And as a student, I loved essay tests. I love to talk, I love to write. So who doesn't love essay tests? Well, Alexander 2014 doesn't love essay tests. The essay, as the primary form of assessment, should be dead. Why would she say such a thing? Well, I'll tell you, she has some good reasons. One, Alexander says that essays are very subject to plagiarism. And we all know that. Any given topic, you get on Google, and in 10 seconds you can find any number of pre-made essays, high school level, college level, whatever. There are even services online where students can pay people to write essays for them. So it's very easy to cheat in writing essays. That makes it a difficult form of assessment. Also, another argument that Alexander offers is she questions whether essays are really authentic, whether they really reflect how people use their knowledge out in the real world. After all, she says, how often does anyone go to work and write essays all day long? Well, I wish I had a job like that, and if you have a job like that, let me know. It sounds like fun. I would say essays are not dead yet. Cheating is a problem, and you need to find ways to overcome that, whether it's using software like Turnitin, which we have here at PC, or other methods to prevent cheating. You have to be mindful of it. But as for authenticity, well, I think essays are an authentic measure of student learning and of student abilities that they can apply in the real world. Now, if you look at that statement, exposing, elaborating, and announcing publicly, presenting a sustained and critical argument, something that requires some higher level thinking, an application of our knowledge, doing it with logic and evidence from our field. Those are skills, really, that we would expect of any professional, especially any professional who's seeking to rise to a management position, who's going to be in charge of other people, who's going to be in charge of making decisions and explaining those decisions to other people in the organization. I will contend, along with McQueen, that essays demand a sort of organization of thought and an expression of thought that's valuable for any professional. So don't count essays out. Now, if you do give essays and you're going to use them to assess student learning, you really do have to think about what you're assessing. Because on paper, on an essay, there are two things happening. There's the thinking, the content that they're getting from your class, but there's also the writing, the quality of that composition as a composition. You want to look at the students' thinking, their understanding, their evidence, and their reasoning using the content knowledge of your course. But then alongside that, you need to decide how important is it that the students express the knowledge of our field in good English, with good spelling and good grammar, in proper APA style, even with good writing style. Are they writing conversationally? Are they writing formally? Are they writing with kind of a good business sense of audience? Those are things you have to consider. Now, for instance, an easy one, spelling. I'm not going to tell you that, yes, you should count 5 points off for every misspelled word, or that you should ignore spelling completely and focus just entirely on your content. That's a decision you have to make as the educator in the room. What are your objectives? How valuable are certain skills, certain performances in your assessment of a student? Okay? There's no one right answer here, but I'm just saying that the thinking versus writing, when you assign essays, when you assess with essays, you've got to go into it knowing what matters. What are your objectives and how much weight are you going to give to each category? That essays are subject to cheating. Multiple choice, objective exams, also subject to cheating. We can get crib notes, answer keys, all that online. Oral exams may be the most cheat-proof form of assessment. Interestingly, they're also the oldest form of assessment. If you think back to the universities that started in the Middle Ages in Europe, they didn't have, the written blue books we used to write our essays in. They just had students and professors, and they talked to each other. It was all oral, all viva voce, as they say in Italian. An oral assessment is immediate. And literally, there's no medium between the student and the instructor. There's no paper, there's no project, there's no product there. It's just two people, scholar talking to scholar directly. That kind of immediate measurement of student abilities, really remarkable way to test what students know. And the fact that they're cheat-proof, it's really hard to look at crib notes while you're looking someone in the eye. The fact that they're cheat-proof may motivate students. Your honest students are probably really frustrated at the fact that a student can cheat and get away with it and get as good a grade as the honest students. When you offer something like an oral exam, students may look at that and go, wow, nobody's going to cheat on that. We're going to be graded fairly. All right. And that sense of fairness will motivate your honest students to work harder and maybe even motivate the cheating students too. We'll see what happens. But orals are great in that resistance to plagiarism. Now, oral exams, like every other kind of exam or assessment, have their pros and cons. On the good side, you've got great authenticity. You've got a student speaking authentically, directly to you. And in terms of career prep, talk about authenticity. If you're going to buy the argument that essays aren't authentic because you never have to go to work and write an essay, well, we can debate that. But if you buy that, well, oral exams, I can say every student is going to do an oral exam to get a job. It's called a job interview. That's authenticity, something every student is going to have to do to get the opportunity to use their learning in a professional setting. That's authenticity. Oral interviews, oral exams, also promote speaking skills, something that maybe we don't do enough of or haven't traditionally in education. Speaking skills in the workplace are just as valuable as writing skills. They're just as valuable for sharing your knowledge and helping other people solve problems working together, so why not teach them and assess them in the form of an oral test? Plus, oral exams offer some inclusivity. There are students who just aren't good writers. There are students who have learning disabilities. There are students who come from cultures that have more of an oral tradition than a written tradition. Now, that doesn't mean you should just abandon writing for them completely. Both forms, written and spoken, are valuable forms of expression for professionals. But when you offer students oral exams, alternating with their written exams, you'll give some of those oral students a chance to shine that they might never get otherwise. Oral exams, authentic, they build speaking skills, and they're inclusive for students of different abilities. On the downside, well, number one, oral exams take time. If you're doing one-on-one conversations with each student, well, let's say you've got 40 students, you do a 10-minute interview with each, that's over 6 hours of interviews. Now, essays may take you 6 hours to grade too, but I'll let you do your own calculations. Just be prepared. If you want to do oral exams one-on-one, it's going to take some time and some planning. Second, oral exams may be subject to bias, or at least complaints about bias. I'm sure whatever assessment you do, you'll still grade each student fairly, and assess their learning properly. But consider, suppose you do an oral quiz. Johnny comes in, he gets a 75%. Susie comes in, she gets a 95%. Johnny looks at his grade and says, wait a minute, I did as good as Susie did. How come I only got a 75? Johnny starts complaining. How do you respond? What evidence do you put forward to respond? Or if your program director or the academic board or somebody above you, if they come in and question why Johnny's complaining, why Johnny only got a 75 and Susie got a 95, how do you document that oral exam? Okay, if you just have a conversation and there's no video, no audio, well, the only documentation you have is your notes and your assessment. I still trust you to do that, but it is something to think about. How will you document each student's performance so you can assure them that bias isn't creeping into your grading? Okay? And finally, oral exams can be stressful. Just like some people get very nervous about public speaking, though I've never had anyone die from it. People may get nervous about speaking directly one-on-one to an instructor. That is very different from sitting at your desk and writing a paper. It's a different situation. Be prepared for that. I won't say avoid it because, hey, as my old chemistry teacher used to say, stress is good to a point. The stress of an oral exam, and actually there's some research on this, students who've expressed anxiety about an oral exam have actually been shown to then knuckle down and study because they know it's going to be tough. And the preparation for an oral exam may actually be more rigorous and produce better learning outcomes than preparation for, say, a multiple choice test. So, recognize the cons of oral exams and of all forms of assessment, but don't let that deter you from deploying those forms of tests well. When you do tests, we've got objective tests, essay tests, and orals. There are pros, there are cons, but each of them can be used effectively in your classroom to see how well your students are learning.